Grigory Grabovoi's unique extrasensory abilities of clairvoyance and prophecy, aimed at universal salvation, have been confirmed in real-life practice by hundreds of reports and testimonies. The second volume, Practice of Control, The Way of Salvation, contains a protocol for experimental testing of Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi's ability to extrasensorily determine accidents, the number of living victims and their locations, and ventilation failures in mines according to the scheme. Moscow, Novy Arbat Street, Building 15. Central Headquarters of the Military Mine Rescue Units of the Coal Industry of Russia. June 16, 1995. 3 p.m. Purpose of the experiment. The purpose of the experiment, under an agreement with the administration of the President of the Russian Federation, was to determine the ability of Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, born November 14, 1963, in the village of Kirovsky District, Chumkin Region, Kazakh SSR, holding birth certificate series 2 OG number 463794, to extrasensorily determine the location of accidents, the number of living victims, and ventilation failures in mines using a scheme. Experiment purity. The purity of the experiment was that, 2.1, the location of the strokes was provided under strictly experimental conditions according to the ventilation scheme in such a way that before the start of the experiment no one knew which schemes would be transferred for Grabovoi Grigory Petrovich extrasensory diagnostics of mines. Grabovoi Grigory Petrovich, using extrasensory perception, almost immediately after being presented with a scheme, correctly indicated the locations of accidents on the schemes, accurately determined the number of living people injured and their location, correctly identified the locations of ventilation failures without time for questions and without knowing the coordinates of the adits on the ground. Independent experts learned about the task of conducting an experiment to test Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi's ability to conduct extrasensory diagnostics of mines immediately after meeting Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi and were randomly assigned tasks. The expert commission consisted of highly qualified specialists and senior staff from the central headquarters of the paramilitary mine rescue units. 3. Data and results of the experiment. 3.1. Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, using extrasensory perception, without any prior information, within 1 second of being given the ventilation scheme of the Vorkutynskaya mine of JSC Vorkutogl, correctly and accurately performed the following, based on the locations of the diagnostic objects. Correctly identified the location of the fire. Correctly identified the locations of 2 surviving victims in the ventilation drift. Correctly identified ventilation problems in the emergency long wall. 3.2. Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi conducted an extrasensory diagnostic of the scheme without any information about the mine's location on the ground, that is, simply from a piece of paper. 3.3. The scheme of the mine was chosen arbitrarily by the members of the expert committee, immediately after meeting with Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi and setting the experimental objectives. 3.4. Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi correctly answered the tasks assigned to him. Using extrasensory perception, he determined the location of the fire, the number of survivors and their locations, and the locations of ventilation problems. Thus, under pure experimental conditions, it was established that Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, using extrasensory perception, almost instantly and accurately diagnoses the mine layout. 4. Conclusion. Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, using extrasensory perception, instantly diagnoses and accurately displays on the scheme the locations of fires, the number and locations of living people in the adits, and the locations of ventilation problems. we consider it advisable to collaborate with Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi in the area of forecasting and preventing emergency situations, and locating and rescuing people from accidents at coal mines. Members of the Expert Commission, Deputy Chief Engineer of the Central Headquarters of the Militarized Mine Rescue Units of the Coal Industry of the Russian Federation. Signature: Kuznetsov. Deputy Chief Engineer of the Central Headquarters of the Militarized Mine Rescue Units of the Coal Industry of the Russian Federation. Signature: Zealous. Round Seal of the Central Headquarters, Ministry of Fuel and Energy of the Russian Federation, Central Headquarters of the Paramilitary Mine Rescue Units of the Coal Industry.